Greetings, Dr. Gilbert. Thank you for sharing today with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Just
Good.
enjoying another gloomy summer day. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I'm Canadian, have been for many, many years, but I was originally born in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn, New York, in the United States. And when I was 21, I emigrated to Canada, motivated primarily by the Vietnam War. And I went to the University of Waterloo, where I received my PhD. And just prior to that, I was hired as a contract limited appointment at the University of Toronto. And I held that for 2 years, and then was offered a position at York University, also in Toronto, where I have remained ever since. And I am now retired. I'm emeritus, but I was a full professor
Oh, wow. So,
in the Department of Philosophy. Yes.
did you ever run in the same circles as like McLuhan when you were at the University of Toronto?
No, he was gone by the time I was there.
Okay. So, how did you come to study argumentation?
Okay, that's a good question. My original research and studies when I was a graduate student were in formal logic. So the first paper I ever published in my career was in the Notre Dame Journal of Formal Logic.
What is
And
formal logic, real quick, for those who don't know?
well, formal logic is the logic of derivations and systematic reasoning that involves drawing inferences out from a set of premises mathematically.
Okay.
Okay. And I was doing that, and I became dissatisfied with the aridity of it. That is to say, it didn't have anything to do with people.
Yeah.
And that bothered me. That bothered me. At the same time, and in fact, as my last year as a graduate student, I had proposed a course to Conestoga College, one of the local colleges in Waterloo, called How to Win an Argument. And they said, wow, that's great. You know, we want to try that course. And then I got hired.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, I mean, in those days, nobody got hired.
Yeah.
It
Sounds like
made,
now.
well, no, it was much worse. It really was
Yeah.
much, much worse. You did not have, you know, 5 or 6 schools, and that was it. You had nothing.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
in fact, I have subsequently learned that I was the last philosophy hire for 10 years.
Whoa. That's a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah, it is. So I became, and what happened was that I moved to the University of Toronto. And the second year I was there, I taught um, an adult education course called How to Win an Argument. And I really enjoyed it. And then I got a phone call from a publisher because it made the radio news.
Oh, that's really cool.
Sort of a clever, fun thing. And you know, radio producers spend all their time searching for clever little things to put on air. And so a publisher heard me and asked if I would be interested in writing a book on the subject. And I said, sure. Now, that particular relationship never came to much, but I did start writing a book, and then I did. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was I wanted to pursue.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Who did you end up studying with when you did your dissertation?
When I did my dissertation, I studied with J.S. Minus,
Okay.
MIAS, at Waterloo. And he was a formal logician and had been in applied formal logic.
So did you find a lot of resonance between your formal logic training and what you were doing with argumentation?
Not much,
Not much. Can
not
you
much.
unpack that a little bit for, because I know maybe the people listening might find that a little bit confusing because they often
Well,
might use the word validity when they hear an
yeah.
argument, say that's invalid, and think that that's the,
Well, there are a lot of words like valid that have different meanings.
yeah.
When I use the word valid, and I hope you kids do too,
Yeah.
I mean the technical deductive meaning, which is to say that the conclusion cannot be true, cannot be false if the premises are true, right? So you cannot derive a false statement from true premises because of the structure of the argument. And that's what it means to say that an argument is valid. However, and it's a lost fight, I don't even try anymore, uh, valid also means well taken, as in that's a valid point.
Yeah.
And all that means is, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, we have these things that we've lost, validity being one of them. The most recent one is beg the question.
Oh, yes. Tell us.
Everyone now uses beg the question to mean demands the question. And it doesn't mean that. Of course, now, of course, it does, but it's too late. But the technical meaning was a logical one.
Well, I think one of the things I love this example that you're highlighting, in that gets at the difference between ordinary argumentation and formal logic, is the way that language refuses stability. And that's one of the issues with ordinary argumentations, is that its main medium is language or symbolicity, which refuses to be stable, whereas formal logic presupposes math, which is a one is a one is a one,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Well, most formal logic. There are formal logics where, of course, get a bit more sophisticated than that. Intuitionist logic and three-valued logic. But essentially, yes.
Yeah. So what do you believe the study of argumentation offers society?
Oh, well, clearly it would banish Trump from the presidency. I mean, he
Yeah.
would fail any quiz we put to him. Um, uh, but what it does is it provides a means for looking at what people are doing when they argue. At
When
least that's my normative goal in argumentation. Um, my whole point in being in argumentation, and my theories are all organized around what people do rather than what we think people should do. So the argumentation theory is replete with a great number of deductivists, by which I mean that in a not very simplistic way, in a more sophisticated way, they believe that the essence of argument is deduction. And I think that's wrong.
yeah,
And my work is designed to show that and provide alternatives.
excellent. And do you think there's a threat from assuming deduction?
I don't understand.
I don't know, just thinking out loud here, because a deductive orientation towards society presupposes a capital T truth as a
Yeah.
politics.
Yes, in that sense, yes. I don't believe in facts. I don't believe in propositions. I don't even believe in statements. I believe in messages and processes. And when we communicate as human beings, we communicate in messages, and all truths are part of a process. We live in a post-Godelian world, by which I mean that Gödel showed us that the world cannot be both complete and consistent. And to me, that means that it's more complex than that. So when we look at a truth, I think one of my favorite stories is look at 2 + 2 = 4, or 1 + 1 = 2. Okay. Now, say I take 2 drops of paint and add one to the other of different colors, right? What do I have? Do I have 2 colors? No, I have 1 color, a third color. And there are many, many examples like that. And in fact, once when I apologized for this example at a conference, someone stood up. He looked like a central casting mathematician, white, wild hair and everything, and said, "Why do you apologize for this example? This is non-Archimedean arithmetics." I never apologized again.
Yeah. Right. No, I think that's a great example. One that I use similar is hydrogen and oxygen, right? When you add them both to a fire, they blow up. Don't do it. But if you put them together, they make water, and you put it on a fire and it puts it out, right? It's an example.
Yep. I like that. Yep.
Addition.
Right.
Right. What happens with emergent logics? I like the color, though. That's way simpler. You don't have to go into like
you don't have to explain chemistry.
Yeah. No, that's really good. So what do you call your approach to argumentation then?
Well, my general approach is multimodal argumentation.
Yeah.
I believe that there are basically 4 modes in which we communicate. And I don't bet the ranch on the 4. Maybe you want 3, maybe you want 6. I don't know. As God bless, it's do however you want it. My model has 4. And there are other models, including the Jungian model, that has 4 similar ones. And I believe that we use all those arenas, aspects, modes when we communicate. And that means when we argue. So that's my approach. Do you want me to go further with the modes?
Yeah, it'd be awesome if you'd find them.
Okay. So the 4. I'm sorry? You froze for a moment there.
Yeah, sorry. Bad internet connection.
Okay.
Zoom life.
Yes. What was your question?
Yeah, please define the modes. Identify and define. That'd be great.
Okay. Briefly then, the logical mode is, if you will, the grandfather of us all, because it's essential in enabling comprehension. We use it to clarify thought. And also there are many arguments which are best explained as logical. Chaim Perelman and Obrecht Stateka in the New Rhetoric call these the quasi-logical. So if you say, John has to be on the airplane because I saw him get on myself, then that's very logical. If you say either it's lunchtime or I'm just hungry, and someone says, well, it's not lunchtime, you say, okay, I'm just hungry, that's also very logical, although we could put other additions to it. So the logic is ever present. And the trick is, Justin, that the fact that it's ever present doesn't mean that it's omniscient. It doesn't mean that it always is what explains everything. And that, I think, is important.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, the next most common mode, actually, I'm not even sure it's most common, but one very, very highly used mode is the emotional mode.
Yeah.
In one sense, we might believe that there's no communication or argument without emotion, because without emotion, we have no impetus to talk, to do anything, certainly to disagree. So uh, most arguments involve at least a modicum of emotion. And of course, as we all know, many involve a lot more
Right.
than a modicum.
Yeah.
And for many arguments, the emotion is central. Eh? I mean, anyone who's in a relationship with an affectionate partner knows that sometimes you have arguments, and clearly it's the emotion that's behind it.
Yeah.
Arguments start out perhaps being about one thing, but then quickly merge or meld or veer into something else.
Yeah.
So, you're driving home from a party with, forgive me, are you heterosexual and married or?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. And you're with your wife, and you say to your wife, "Boy, why did Marcia get so upset about that ice cream?" I mean, okay. I mean, she knew the ice cream was hard, and apparently she told Larry to take it out. And your wife looks at you and says, "It wasn't about the ice cream."
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And you say, "No, no." Oh, okay. Right. And this is also, it's typical, by the way, this is in a gender thing. Women are more sensitive to that, generally speaking. So these are all ways in which your wife, in this case, picked up on the emotional undertone that was really what the argument was all about.
Right.
And in fact, it had nothing to do with the ice cream.
Right.
Most of us recognize this kind of thing. You go home and you say to your partner, "How are you?" And he says, "Fine." Okay. All right, I'm going to go slow here. I'm going to be careful. So these are all ways in which we read emotion. And more often than not, you will trust your emotional reading more than your dialectical reading, more than your logical reading.
Right.
And this is something, I mean, people, for example, who are on the spectrum have trouble distinguishing between those, and need to learn that the fact that someone says, "I'm okay" or "I'm all right" doesn't always mean that they are.
Yeah. Between the different messages. Right.
Exactly. And again, you see, it's a message, not a statement, that's important. And one of the things that I say is that an emotional argument is one in which the emotions involved are more important than the words. And we have a lot of those.
Yeah.
Um, the next one up is visceral. Now, visceral is a huge one because obviously, first of all, it covers things that are physical. So if you touch me, push me, poke me, that's all visceral statements. But it also includes such things as power relations, gestural indicators. Um, I include gender under the visceral. The imbalance of power that's often the case between the genders is a visceral fact. And of course, it can be something else. Let me just put in a commercial here.
Yeah.
Okay? Talking about the modes sometimes makes it sound, and people think that you can identify the mode something is in.
Yeah.
That's not the case. Virtually everything is in every mode to one degree or another at the same time. What made me think of this when I was talking about the gender power relations, and how also a large factor in that is emotion.
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Um, so when I talk about this, it's not the case that something is ever in one. There might be paradigms of
Right.
one or another. Uh,
These are more analytic categories to help you sort of suss
they're,
out.
they're models. It's a model, and the model is not reality. The old saying, yes, a menu is a model for what's there to eat, but if you're hungry, you don't eat the menu, right?
You love a good
So,
old
so
food.
we don't want to confuse the model with reality.
Right.
Okay, so the visceral covers all of that, and the last mode that I talk about is the Kiseral, Kisceral, the Kiseral mode. And that derives from the Japanese word, which is ultimately derived from the Chinese word, and I've recently learned, ki or tai or chi. And I just wanted to pick a term. It's what in philosophy we call a term of art. That is to say, I've invented it so that it's not carrying any baggage. And the Kiseral mode refers to all communications, messages that are in the, what do we want to say, mystical, intuitive, uh, um, religious mode. Someone says, oh, you have to have faith. That's in the Kiseral mode. And there are lots of things, hunches. Someone says, do you want to just say no? Why? I said, I've just got a feeling I wouldn't like it. Huh? And you could be wrong. See, that's the other thing, is that the fact that something is in the Kiseral mode does not mean that it's impervious to challenge. One of my favorite and most well-known stories is called The Spooky House. Right? So I'm looking for an apartment, and you point out to me an ad for an apartment. And I say, oh, okay, that sounds good. I'll go see it. And I go see it, and I look at it, and you see me the next day, and you say, well, how did it go when you viewed that apartment? I said, I didn't like it. I says, why not? It was 2 bedrooms and living room and good locations. It was spooky. What? There was something spooky about the apartment. He says, I don't know, can't put my finger on it. But it was just, I didn't want to touch it. Okay, that's the spooky, right? We understand that you had a bad vibe. However, you can also say to me, Michael, let's go look at it together. I'm having trouble with this. We go back and you look and you say, yeah, you know what? It's very dark in here. If you chop down the branches of that tree by that window and put in some lights here, it'll change everything. Right? Now you're arguing with me about this Kiseral feeling. That doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to accept it. But it does show that we can argue about these things.
Yeah, that can be the subject of an inference, is what
That's
you're
right.
saying.
That's
Well, I
right.
think that sort of gets us to this next very deceptive. It's funny the overarching comment of this question, the overly deceptively simple sounding question, which is, what is an argument?
I have no idea. An argument for me is any communication where there's a difference of opinion.
Okay. Can you unpack that for me a little bit?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. Look, arguments do not have any explicit structure. It's not like you have to have premises and a conclusion. Right? It's not like it has to be in words. I had an argument once with a bus driver that was entirely done by hand gestures. I'm waiting him. He's on my right, and I'm waiting for him to go. He doesn't go, and I look at him, and he goes, telling me to go. And I'm getting ready to go, and I look, and there's someone about to cross the street. So he looks at me and goes, and I go, and he goes, no. Right? This is an entire communication without words. And it was an argument. We were disagreeing about whether I should go or not. So whenever there is dissensus, whenever there's disagreement, there's an argument. If there's no disagreement, there's no argument, right? So one of the first things that we do when we're faced with a message is to decide whether we want to agree or disagree. You might not like it, but you might decide, nah, this isn't worth it. And just move on to something else. So there's no argument. Why? Because the disagreement was not focused. Okay, does that help?
Yeah, so it sounds like part of your definition is that argument is always social.
Yes. Yes. You can, this is one of my students are always hucking me about whether or not you can argue with yourself.
Yeah.
And I said, look, maybe, I don't know, I don't care.
Yeah.
If you argue with yourself, Willard says if you argue with yourself, you're really rehearsing.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe you are. I mean, certainly it's not like arguing with someone else, but it is a little bit sometimes, but I don't know.
Clearly they've never edited an essay before, right? Like, is that not kind of like arguing with yourself in time?
Yeah, it can be. That's right. Which is the best way to put that? The original way? No, maybe this way. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that is a form of disagreement. So how do you identify when an argument has occurred?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, how do you identify when an argument has occurred? There's been some interaction around an idea or a message. I mean, there's been some difference of opinion. You want to go to Larry's for dinner, and I want to go to, the Big Fish. I mean, and you say, oh, the Big Fish, I just had fish last night. Say, all right, fine, let's go to Larry's. Quick, simple argument. But I mean, the other thing about arguments is that we tend to think of them as taking place in a very finite space and time. And they don't always do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they boil up and then they cool down, but they haven't been resolved. Right? They've been resolved when we both agree on an outcome, whether it was the one either of us began with or not. I think I have to. Could you pause us for a minute?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah, sometimes we don't know when we had an argument.
Yeah, because some of them are so subtle and tiny and require just a little adjustment in our thinking that it can come and go without any sort of realization, whereas other arguments are much bigger and larger and noticeable.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting takeaway. So we had an argument, and your position as critic. How do you then analyze the argument? How do you go about analyzing the argument?
I lost you for a second there. We had an argument, and
how do you analyze it as a critic?
Okay. Well, this is a very big question because there are 4 modes, and each of those modes has its own normative structure. And it's not always easy to activate that in the sense of any traditional sort of analysis. So, for example, there are what I think are good and bad um, emotional arguments. And a good emotional argument is one where emotions are given to you that are grist for the mill, so to speak, that are take this into consideration. You know, don't quit university to become a Machu Picchu tour guide, because it will disappoint your father. You're going to be the first one in our family to get a degree, and he'll be very disappointed. Don't quit university and become a tour guide in Machu Picchu, because it will kill your father. It will just destroy him. He'll become ill and sick, and it'll be your fault. That I consider to be a fallacy, because it takes the choice away.
Interesting.
And that's just an example. I mean, I haven't done a ton of work on the normativity of the modes. I'm hoping some young scholars look into this, and some are, about what are good and bad arguments in different modes. I mean, we have it to a certain extent in logic with the concept of validity. But even there, it's different. I mean, in logic, you also have the idea of simplicity, that a simple argument is better than a complex one. That's not always the case in other modes.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I like the idea of choice. So it seems to some extent with the modes that you want to respect agency of your interlocutor as the foundational principle.
Yes, very much so.
And I think about that with for example, my own work with sound. I was theorizing force, for instance, because one of the things about sound is it has a materiality, right? And this materiality can be weaponized in a way that other modes might not necessarily be considered, right? There are sonic weapons. It can be turned into a sound cannon that they're deploying to move protesters, and that can literally make people poop themselves, the brown note, so to speak. Yeah.
TMI.
You're right, exactly. How do we start incorporating sort of a language when the message could enact physical harm on the body?
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that is a really interesting set of questions that argumentation needs to start grappling with, because I think there is this a reason? We might hope court say no, but what happens if we start asking yes, or under what conditions?
Well, that's it. I mean, when you look at the example I was using before about emotion, one of the phrases that sometimes applied is emotional blackmail.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't do what I want, then these terrible consequences are going to befall, and it's going to be on your head. And yes, I mean, there's harmful stuff, and it has to be. I mean, first of all, it has to be true, and secondly, it has to be framed in such a way that it does not remove agency.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because doesn't always argument at its very premise, if you believe some of the other work done, risk face, which in its way also removes some form of agency, right? If I provoke you into a disagreement, you in a way are now all of a sudden risking some of the self, which itself could enact harm.
Yes, that's very much the case. And I have a whole, in my book, Coalescent Argumentation, I have a whole chapter on goals. And the thing about argument, when we're looking at it as a practice, is that goals are always manifold.
Yeah.
They're never singular. You may have as a goal getting me to loan you my car so that you can go to Vancouver, right?
It's
But
great for me.
right, of course, you're not
I need those Canadian license plates.
want you,
Getting out.
right? Um, but by the same token, you don't want to put it in such a way that you're going to alienate me,
Right.
right? Because our relationships, and we're doing this, we have relationship goals, face goals, as you call them. And so what we're worried about is I'm worried about what you think of me. You're worried about what I think of you. And
Yeah.
we're worried about our relationship, right?
Right.
And that relationship has various dynamics, and we want to preserve them and honor them.
Right.
Right. And so one of the things that I often counsel people is to say, always pay attention to your goals and what they are and what you really want. And most people, one of my canards is most people don't know what they're talking about most of the time because they're not aware of all their goals.
Yeah.
It's like, look, you're students. I'm sure most of you have gone in to talk to a prof about a grade change or on a quiz or something like that. And you're aware of this balance between putting forward your argument and not being too aggressive, right? Because this is a person who's going to give you a final grade too.
Right.
And if you start yelling at them or you start abusing them, then you've lost more, very likely, than just the point you were after.
Right.
Right? So that's part of the whole process and part of the visceral and emotional modes that enter into an argument.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, I think that's a really good lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you give a contemporary example of your perspective on argumentation?
You mean an argument that's ongoing?
Yeah, like a political one or something that the students might be able to hold on to.
Well, I mean, look at where we are now in the pandemic,
Yeah.
right? In case you're watching this years later, there's a terrible, terrible virus on the loose here, causing possibly fatal occurrences, and we're all hunkered down, trying to avoid it.
I like the optimism that we'll be able to watch this years later.
Yeah,
Let us hope.
Right. And if you look at, for example, the difference between Canada and the United States, is, well, I'm not going to use that example.
It's going to depress us.
Well, it depresses you. It also, I mean, I don't want to say things that I can't defend easily. All right, here's one. So Israel right now is thinking about annexing the West Bank, right? So what sort of factors are going into that? Well, one factor is illogical. They've been in possession of it for whatever it is, 20 years, 40 years. And it makes administrative sense to make it legal, official. Great. Right? However, emotionally, there's the Palestinian view that this is their homeland, and that if this is annexed, they'll never be able to create a state there. On the Israeli side, you have emotions as well, because there are a lot of Israelis who believe that is originally part of the Greater Judea and should belong to the state of Israel.
Right.
It's very complex. I mean, there are Orthodox Israelis who believe the state of Israel should not exist. It's crazy. Everybody's crazy out there.
Yeah.
So, well, it's true. I mean, they really are. So, and then, so there's the emotional, and then there's the visceral. Well, Israel's got this army, and the Palestinians have fighters, but there's no comparison. So the visceral part, and of course, the Israelis are in possession of it, which is a visceral fact. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The kisserl comes in because who promised what to whom? Well, God enters the picture. And that's a big club to carry. So all of these factors are factors that have to do with different modes. And one of the things, of course, that I say is that if you're going into negotiations, let's say, you have to separate the modes as best you can, deal with them separately, and understand that everyone has positions on both sides coming from those modes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a way to sort of disentangle all the different forces and attachments as you're trying to make sense of it.
That's right. It's like the ice cream example. When your wife sees that the ice cream wasn't the real factor, but Larry's not paying attention while she's working all day for a dinner party or something like that, is the real key. Which is why people go into couples therapy and things like that.
You have to be able to be able to disentangle.
That's right. And to learn how to listen and learn how to uncover what's important.
Yeah. Other cues.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's good. Well, so do you have anything else you would like to impart to young argumentation scholars come up and coming?
Yes, I do. Argumentation is important because we all hope that where there's argument, there's not violence. And our idea is that if we can keep talking, perhaps we won't fight. However, it's also not a panacea, because sometimes we run out of arguments, we run out of issues, and we end up fighting. We see that it happens very commonly today. And no matter how many arguments there are people who will just ignore them. Trump is brilliant at simply ignoring arguments. I mean, he just simply doesn't hear them. And that's why the US is in so much trouble with the virus today, because he decided to ignore them. And if he didn't ignore them, he'd have to do something about them. And there's nothing he can do about it, except what other countries have done, and that's shut things down.
Right.
And for him, that was not a real option because of the consequences would make him look bad. And I said I wasn't going to talk about that.
No, I think that is more than fair and apt. Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Gilbert, for your time today.
Very welcome, Justin. I appreciate your including me.
Yeah, we appreciate all of that you've done. We hope you have a really good day. Cheers.
Bye-bye.